Welcome to the AICA conference in New York City. I'm Jane King. With me is Chuck Jaffe, who is the host of Money Life with Chuck Jaffe, and then also the NAVigator Podcast. And we were just chatting a little bit. You're talking about how these BDCs, business development corporations, I almost said CBDs, are become so popular. And like, what are you seeing in terms of interest from the audience and guests?
Well, so I have two audiences because the NAVigator is the Active Investment Company Alliance podcast. So it's always on closed-end funds or interval funds or business development companies. That's basically the focus. And it's both a piece of my show. It appears every Friday on my show, and it appears every Friday on the AICalliance.org website. People can go get it there, et cetera. So the audience for the NAVigator through AICA is they're industry folks. And of course, they're fascinated, but they're also, paid to be here, and they're doing it from a very educated standpoint.
Yeah.
The viewpoint of the audience of Money Life, I would say our audience is people who are no longer average investors, but still think they are. You can't listen to an hour of solid financial talk with the best and brightest minds every day and be an average investor for long. So they're not. They start with us. If they stick with us, they become above average investors who still think they're average. And the interest there has gone up dramatically, but also when I talk with money managers, I talk with them from all stripes of companies. The number who are talking private credit, they may not always be talking about BDCs, but the numbers who are talking private credit and how they think it is the place to be is huge. I can be talking with the most mainstream, the blue blood mainstream firms that nobody thinks of as like, this is where you go for something alternative. And yet their people are saying they want to be in private credit. They are always talking about it as an asset class. And so we've seen an explosion of interest without always an understanding of what happens. Now at this event, obviously all the players who are here, they know what's going on. But the rest of the world, they need to hear some of this stuff. Like we were talking at the session that I moderated about things that are going through Congress, and people hear, one big beautiful bill, and they're thinking, okay, it's depending on which side of the aisle you're on, it's tax cuts for the rich, or it's what?
Yeah.
Well, in there, in the middle of those 1,000 pages, there's tax parity for business development companies.
Interesting.
It is a provision that most people haven't heard of. We were talking with Tawny Weibensinger from the Small Business Industry Association. She's been lobbying it because she's got to teach the congressmen the same way we have to teach the individual investors. And, oh, by the way, if you're a BDC investor and that goes through, you will get a bit of a tax benefit. And as much as you can think of it as a tax cut, and there are some people who are like, okay, wealthy investors getting a tax cut, we don't need that. The flip side of that is this is done to create more opportunities and more lending, and the lending creates more business, and the business is what pays the tax cut.
Stimulates the economy.
Exactly. It's a virtuous cycle. So, you have it at all levels where there's tremendous interest. There's also stuff that's going on that, you could be an average investor and not recognize that some of this stuff is out there. And, you wouldn't know if you hear somebody talking about go for private credit, look at how strong the yields are. The average investor could go look at that and go, oh, I see a double-digit yield.
Yeah.
Awesome. I'll go towards that because they're talking about private credit. But double-digit yields are not all created equal. Some are legitimate, some are returns of capital. So you have to hope that as more people are introduced to these asset classes, that they come in with understanding.
Right.
Because
don't just go for the highest yield, look at the whole. Right. Do you find that's the thing people are most interested in is the yield? Because that is quite attractive.
On the BDC front, it's the yield. On the closed-end fund front, it's some combination of yield with discount.
Okay. And, but I do still feel like the general public doesn't even really know these exist, let alone understand them.
Well, I've told you this story before. I tell it every time I get a chance because Yeah, and I'll preface this story by pointing out that I don't believe that most financial literacy efforts work. Because if they teach you about money when you don't have any money, you've forgotten the lesson that you needed to know. By the time it comes in, you know there's something you're supposed to know, but you don't really know what it is.
Okay.
So when we started working with the NAVigator and the Active Investment Company Alliance, it was one segment on my show, on 5 shows a week. So we normally do 3 or 4 interviews a day. So it was, maybe 5% of our real estate in a week that had 20 interviews. And my regulars were like, closed-end funds, Chuck, come on. It's way too much on closed-end funds. Who cares? And then they heard about them. And then they started looking into them because they heard about them. And then they started going, this is great. And now my audience routinely says, can we do more on closed-end funds? And that's what happens when, if luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, this is how people get lucky in and pick the right investments, is they're going, I'm ready for this, and now I have an understanding, and now I've got the information that I'm not getting anyplace else. And that's whether it's AICA doing this, etc., an event like this one, you couldn't have had this event just a few years ago because there wouldn't have been enough support for it because there were not enough BDCs. And now, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have needed both hands to count the number of BDCs. And now you need both hands to count how many BDCs are like in registration. Yeah. So you can see that the industry.
Clearly, there's some interest and momentum there. Where can people go to hear your podcast?
Well, for starters, the NAVigator, if you just want to drill it down, it's at the Active Investment Company Alliance website, AICalliance.org. It's also on all your favorite podcast apps, as is my show. Money Life is available every place you'd expect it to be. It's Money Life with Chuck Jaffe, but it's also available at moneylifeshow.com.
Okay, Chuck, thanks so much.
Always a pleasure. Great to see you, Jen.